Ladies and gentlemen, founder and CEO of Acumen, Ms. Jacqueline Novogratz.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to GCF, and I definitely want to thank the many Saudis who've made this my first trip here so extraordinary over the last 2.5 days. The level of warmth and generosity that I've experienced has just been extraordinary, so thank you for that. And today, I want to talk about two things really. The work of social entrepreneurship and the building of new innovative models to use the private sector approaches to solving big public problems. And equally, if not more important, I want to talk about the kind of moral leadership that's needed to make this happen in a world that is so full of uncertainty. And if I could think of one word for 2016, it is indeed this word, uncertainty. We've been talking about it for the last 2 days. There's so much that's happening in the world. I was in Nigeria last week, and almost every business person I met and student said that they are long-term optimistic, but short-term not so much. It's a rough and rolling time, and we need new tools, new skills to take on those times. Sometimes these challenges can feel overwhelming. And yet, we cannot forget that this is also a time, as Gopal said earlier, of extraordinary opportunity. Not only did we have the tools and the technologies to make the change, but young and old social entrepreneurs, leaders are making those changes, recognizing that this technology that can make things move so fast that we pull in and we blame rather than extend are also those same tools that are connecting us across the planet. Almost every human being has a cell phone, and that is not powerful only for the way we communicate and connect, but also in innovation around health and energy, agriculture. I want to talk a little bit about that because it is on that that we need to build. I believe that this idea of social entrepreneurs exists in all of our companies, in all of our institutions, too many of which are losing trust. But the social entrepreneurs that I have been working with these last 15 years through Acumen, and really 30 years in my life, are the ones who dare to start with the problem itself rather than their comfort zone, either in the for-profit sector or the nonprofit sector, and then see the tools of capitalism and government and charity simply as that, tools. They are non-ideological. They are driven to solve problems. And in fact, it was understanding this that in 2001 made me decide to found Acumen with this focus on changing the way the world tackles poverty by investing in companies, leaders, and ideas. I had worked on Wall Street, and I had seen the power of the markets to bring efficiencies to solving problems, but too often markets overlook and even indeed sometimes exploit the poor. On the other hand, I had seen top-down approaches to aid, to charity create dependence. And if I have learned one thing, it is that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is dignity, choice, opportunity, the ability to have impact in your own life. And so the idea of Acumen was that our charitable resources, our government, should be the most risk-oriented capital that we have, and yet too often is where we see the least amount of risk. So could we take that and invest in entrepreneurs that were willing to go where markets and government were both falling short, which is something the whole world is experiencing now, healthcare, education, agriculture, energy, and find those solutions that we could scale in partnership with government and the corporate sectors. It's been thrilling to see over the last 15 years that this approach can really work. We've invested about $100 million in about 88 companies across South Asia, Africa, and most recently Latin America. And we've seen these companies grow to reach over 125 million people, create 60,000 jobs, bring in another $500 million into the companies themselves. These are companies that serve people making just a couple of dollars, if that, per day. But most important, they are creating models for how we change the world. Now, as Gopal said before, We have so many of the technologies and even the techniques. We know how to solve a lot of problems. And I could take you through each of them. But what I think we're missing most of all in all the countries in which I operate and work is a framework for moral leadership, not just talent. A moral leadership that understands that we need a new way of operating in this interconnected world, one that doesn't see the world as divided, but rather sees full integration. So I want to go through just 5 of the qualities of moral leadership, and underneath it talk about some of the companies that we've seen being built. The first is moral imagination, the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes and build solutions from their perspective, not yours. So I take you to the issue of sanitation. 1 in 3 humans on the planet have no access to a toilet. 2.5 billion people. Hard for government to bring public infrastructure into informal settlements like this. 4 million people alone live in the slums of Nairobi. Hard for the charities. They often, well-intended, would dig latrines, but when the latrines are filled, they fall into disrepair and disuse. 3 graduate students at MIT's School of Business, Sloan School, were undaunted. They started from the perspective of the community. They built a latrine that people would actually want to use, that was beautiful, that was clean. They insisted on accountability by selling that latrine to local entrepreneurs in the community, and thus far have brought 750. And then, of course, the big issue is, now what do you do with the waste? And the ingenious piece of this, but also the risk, which meant that we needed patient capital, was to collect this waste on a daily basis in sealed containers, creating more jobs, and then composting the waste, transforming it into fertilizer, and trying to commercialize it on the market. Not an easy thing to do, which is why, again, we needed this experimental capital. For the first 4 years, that third piece didn't work. But last year, they sold 87 metric tons of fertilizer to commercial farms in Kenya, and we're seeing farmers' productivity increase as well. And now, for the first time, Sanergy needs to increase its raw materials, and so we can actually start to sell more toilets. If this actually turns profitable, which I believe it will, we'll have a model, not only for Kenya, but across the world, where this is one of our big problems. The second is this idea of thinking big and recognizing that you also have to start small, build unit profitability before you grow. So you can imagine what it was like when some entrepreneurs came into our office in India and they started describing the situation of ambulances, the emergency healthcare delivery system. At that time, if you wanted to take a loved one to the hospital, your only real option was a taxi. You called ambulances only to take a dead relative for burial. The system was broken, it was bloated, it was multi-billion dollar. There was too much corruption in it. At the time, this team of 5 had only 9 ambulances, most of them donated by charity. Still, the guy in the car particularly had so much grit and determination and audacity that we decided to buy 30% of the company. Over the last 10 years, the company has had to experiment, fail over and over again. But they learned what it would take to build a healthcare delivery service that used the private sector and the public sector, starting with cross-subsidy pricing. If you take you to a private hospital, you pay market prices. If we take you to a public clinic, you pay what you could afford or free. Second is marketing, awareness building. There was no trust. And so they had to try all kinds of ways to get people to believe that an ambulance would actually come, including guerrilla marketing. And the third was ethics. Ethics through every part of the company, which took a long time to show and to build. But today that company has almost 1,300 ambulances, 6,000 employees. It has taken 4 million people to hospital and serves the catchment area of 300 million people across India. We now have a model of a public-private partnership, because this only works with government supporting it, so that everyone in the space in which it operates can not only know where to call an ambulance, but actually believe that that ambulance will come. Obviously, changing the status quo, then audacity, it takes a lot of moral courage. And when I think about courage, one of the people that most comes to mind is a young Pakistani-American man named Javad Aslam. After 9/11, he decided, even though Pakistan wasn't his nationality, he would go back to his ancestral home and bring his skills in commercial real estate to try to tackle the low-income housing deficit, about 7 million units needed. He had the courage to spend 18 months trying to just register the land without paying a bribe. He had the courage to build a house for himself in the middle of this community so that he could understand the needs of the community. I was with him when he had the courage not only to endure a crossfire among different bandits, but then to show up the next day and show the people there that he was showing up as well. It was a long road, again, 10 years, but today not only is there a thriving community for low-income people, but Pakistan also has a model, and he's just closed a deal to take this housing model to many different states across the country. All of these entrepreneurs have all of these qualities, but grit and determination is one I sometimes worry about because I hear so many young people around the world who want to change the world, but they would like to do it in a 3-year period. This is really hard stuff. Gopal talked about a multi-stakeholder model. To have the skill set to work across the sectors, to understand the needs of the poor and have the kind of empathy needed for that takes a long time to build. When I think of grit and determination, though, the company that most comes to mind is Delight, which 10 years ago decided that because of the reliance of 1.5 billion people in the world on kerosene as really their only form of energy, that they could do better than that. And so with this audacious idea that they would bring solar as a substitute for kerosene, Nick Hosum and Sam Goldman got started. At the time, solar was $4 a watt. There was no trust. People couldn't afford the product. It was $36. But they worked at it. They failed again. They started and understood how to design from the perspective of poor, what they would actually spend. They priced it accordingly. They learned how to market and create awareness because this was a push product. In many ways, it still is. And third, they had to understand financing. Now, in this case, the entrepreneurs actually did less than what was happening in the larger world, but they were ready to jump on opportunities. 11, Safaricom, which is Kenya's largest cell phone company, really moved into, not only moved into mobile banking, but had the foresight to understand that if they created a joint venture with Safaricom, people could not only buy a solar system that would be well above what they would be able to pay with cash, but they could use their mobile money to pay on a daily basis, just like they used to pay for kerosene. And from my perspective, 2011 is where we started to see the solar revolution take off. They moved into home household systems, so now you not only are buying lights, but electricity for your cell phone and radios and televisions and things to enable you to work. Investing in Delight also helped us invest across an ecosystem. Product companies like Delight, home electricity systems, mini grids and microgrids, and finally affordable cook stoves. This has all taught us that next step so that we can take a big audacious idea and begin to dream that there is a different way to reach the rural poor of Africa, a continent of 1 billion people where 80% people live off-grid. And rather than continue to spend money only on trying to extend the electric grid, take a bet on building an off-grid solar ecosystem. I believe it can be faster, cheaper, and more effective than fully waiting for the grid to reach the low-income people. And so we're developing a $100 million initiative to invest in the best companies across East Africa in partnership with the government of Rwanda to start to prove this model. Now, doing this takes the 5th quality of moral leadership, and that is faith. We don't talk enough about faith when we think about what it means to build the kind of leadership we need in ourselves and in the next generation. Tragically, it's been an uncomfortable thing for too many people to talk about, yet you can't change the world if you don't believe the world will get better. You can't have a crazy idea and move toward it and move yourself through the long loneliness without understanding that you are part of something bigger than yourself. I was so excited to hear Gopal talking about it, and it is the strength of our diversity that gives us such opportunity to remind ourselves and each other, not only of the beauty of our individual faiths and where that comes from, religious and non-religious, but how that can strengthen us. And one of the great privileges of my life in working with so many young entrepreneurs around the world is that I get to be in circles where we have the safety to share. I think of a young man named Fahad, from a Pashtun from Peshawar, who talks about saying his morning prayer and putting his forehead to the ground after he has seen so much violence, more than anyone should see, and thanking God not only for his life, but for the fact that he is connected to every human being on this planet. I think of a Jain in India who every morning goes outside her home to feed the pigeons with a bowl of seeds, to remind herself that she is connected to every human living thing on the planet. I think of Nelson Mandela, who moved from a spirit of Ubuntu, that I am because you are. The more that we can create cohorts of leaders who are bound to one another, not because of tribe or ethnicity or class or even generation, but by adherence to shared values and a shared dream of a world in which all people matter, the more we can actually celebrate this diversity and find greater strength in ourselves and in each other. And it was really this belief that we not only needed to build companies, but we needed to build a cohort of moral leaders that made us 10 years ago decide to create the Acumen Fellows Program, where we would identify some of our best and brightest, our young men and women who wanted to pursue lives of change, lives of moral leadership. And we've supported about 300 of them from all over the world. And I wish you could see them. You'll meet some of them. They are beautiful. And they give you the hope that moves us through uncertainty. We bring them through a curriculum that is focused on operational and management, but also the moral imagination, the values piece of the work. With our global fellows, we actually put them in companies in India and Pakistan and East Africa for 9 months, where they have to learn what it means to build a company where there's no infrastructure, where there's high levels of corruption, where there's very tough on the talent supply, not such great management systems. And after it, they go into the world, and many of them are starting incredible organizations or helping other organizations get stronger. I think of Abu Bakr Siddiqui in Pakistan, who works with an organization named Huat, who is experimenting with taking zakat and using it in more sustainable, scalable ways so that people will not be dependent and can control their own lives. Or James Kasaga, a Ugandan who spent a year working in an education company in India and is now taking Teach for Uganda and building it in his country. And one of the senses of pride and joy really came about because the King Khalid Foundation here in Saudi Arabia took a leap of faith, and I dare say some courage, in supporting us 4 years ago so that we could identify some of the best Saudi young social entrepreneurs and bring them into the Fellows Program. And 3 of them are here today. It looks like only 4 individuals, but what you find in this interconnected world is the ripples that come from each of them. Not only have these 4 done incredible things in and of their own selves, here and elsewhere in the world, but they've inspired a generation along with other social entrepreneurs here. They, along with King Khalid Foundation, helped create the first Plus Acumen chapter in Riyadh and then Jeddah. And then that chapter of people who have day jobs but are dreaming about how they can contribute are supporting one another in many different ways, including taking my book, The Blue Sweater, and translating it into Arabic. I did nothing to help them. And on Sunday night, we had a book launch, which was truly one of the most amazing moments of my life. And I thank them for it. They also pushed us along with other chapter members around the world to take our lessons and put them online. And now we've had 270,000 people around the world take these classes, and many of them are going off to start social enterprises. Shahad is working with an American fellow to build a company called Just, which brings transparency along the supply chain in the fashion industry. And as all of you know, and your sons and daughters, the millennials, only want to buy from companies that they trust, that they understand, that are sustainable. And so I think this is going to be a great adventure. You're going to meet Lou Jane in the next panel, and I'll let her talk about the social enterprise she started, Tasami, and the work that she's doing in India, hopefully working in an education company. These ripples, you start to see where we're going here. Because I think that what the world needs is that we redefine success away from celebrating only those individuals who can make the most money, and focused on celebrating those individuals who can release the most human capability in the world. We need those individuals to start looking at that metric, and I find them in every country. It's a long, hard road, though, as I said. The people who go to make significant change in the world cannot sign up for easy. They need to endure the long loneliness, and there is no single roadmap to do it. As a result, at Acumen, we really struggled with how could we help young leaders and ourselves, quite frankly, learn to navigate the many different stakeholders. What would be our moral compass? Could we create a set of shared values that would bind us? And if you'll indulge me, I will read our manifesto. It starts with standing with the poor, listening to voices unheard, and recognizing potential where others see despair. Demands investing as a means, not an end. Daring to go where markets have failed and aid has fallen short. And makes capital work for us, not control us. It demands investment as a means, not an end. It thrives on moral imagination, the humility to see the world as it is and the audacity to imagine what it could be. It's having the ambition to learn at the edge, the wisdom to admit failure, and the courage to start again. It requires patience and kindness, resilience and grit, a hard-edged hope. It's leadership that rejects complacency, breaks through bureaucracy, challenges corruption, doing what's right, not what's easy. It's the radical idea of creating hope in a cynical world, changing the way the world tackles poverty, building a world based on dignity. It all comes back to human dignity. Whenever I'm in a country in which we work, I find a way to go and visit the customers that are being served by that company. And a few months ago, I went to visit Mary, who is one of the 10,000 distributors of the D-Light lights, which have now, as I said, gone to 55 million people. But Mary refuses to be paid. She's a volunteer. Or as she said to me, Jacqueline, I'm not an agent, I'm an angel. And I said, Mary, with all respect, you're in the target customer market. You are one of the low-income people. Why would you do this for free? They would pay you. She said, Jacqueline, I'm 68 years old. And before I die, I want to know that I have served my community and my country. And I can think of no better way to do so than to share with my neighbors and friends, and even those people I do not know, the opportunity to buy something that will change their lives and let them see what they can do. We, as human beings, yearn to be good, and we yearn to serve, and too often we just don't know how. This release of energy. Yesterday I was in Qasim visiting one of the Saudi social enterprises, a group that works with widows and divorcees that build crafts and make beautiful foodstuffs. And I felt the same feeling, that these women were not wanting to talk to me about how much income they were earning only. They wanted to talk about the service they were doing, how exciting it was that people were actually asking them for their opinion. And one even said, you know, if you do an exhibition of our products anywhere in the world, I will travel with you. It's changing the circles of mobility, where people can go, but it starts with that sense of the possible. When I think about that human spirit, Mary's, the women I met yesterday, the fellows, the young people I have met across Saudi Arabia these last few days, all around the world, I think that it is this shared collective spirit that holds the seeds of human consciousness. And it is really our shared consciousness that gives us the capability to imagine a world that we could create if we dare to see ourselves as integrated, not as separate. For separate is an illusion and a delusion, both in the way that we look at our financial situation and our spiritual lives. We have to live as whole people, and we need to build a whole world. And I dare say, these last 15 years have given me more cause for optimism. And these last few days of seeing the young generation that wants to be used, and I dare say used up, making the world they dare to dream, reminds me that we are each other's destiny, and that we will not have dignity as a human race until every single one of us has dignity. And so I end by saying thank you again for the opportunity. Know that you've got these beautiful young generation that is the true treasure of this country, and frankly, every country. And I wish all of them and all of you Godspeed. Thank you.